In this lesson, we begin developing the professional-grade sample application that will serve as our example throughout the rest of this tutorial. Although this sample app will eventually have users, microposts, and a full login and authentication framework, we begin with a seemingly limited topic, the creation of static pages. Along the way, we get our first taste of automated testing, which will help us be more confident that our code is correct. Moreover, having a good test suite allows us to refactor our code with confidence, changing its form without changing its function. In this lesson, we'll begin development of the main sample application used throughout the rest of the tutorial. We'll start with the deceptively simple and highly instructive task of creating static pages. We'll then add a small amount of dynamic content. Along the way, we'll get our first taste of automated testing, including an introduction to test-driven development. As in the previous two lessons, we'll start by creating a new Rails application at the command line, like this. Remember, it's Rails new. And as before, I want to put in a specific version number. So in this case, I'm going to put in 4.2.0 beta 2. In the previous two lessons, I used beta 1. But in fact, there's a slight subtlety. Things will still work if you use beta 1, but it won't be quite as smooth. So this is actually better. And I'll show you in a second what happens if you don't have this. This should be installed on your system because when you run bundle install on these guys, like the Hello app and the Toy app, let's look at the gem file. This line will force, actually it's beta 1, look at that. I think I did beta 2 here. Right. So this is beta 2. This has installed that Rails gem on the system. And so we can look at this gem list. If you do gem list Rails, it should confirm that 4.2. Let's take a look at it. 4.2.beta. Where is it? Here. Point beta 2 is here. 4.2.0.beta 2. If that's not on your system, then what you should do is run gem install Rails-v. And at this point, you would then just rerun this command, the new command. Let me show you what happens if you try it with a version of Rails that doesn't exist on the system. You can see, so you're just going to get an error like that. Try this. Again, you're going to get an error. So that's an indication that this version of Rails is not installed on the system. But it's working for us now. We actually do have a sample app here. And as before, you should not use this gem file or even the gem file I'm about to show you, but rather you should use the gem file from the URL I'm about to show you. And it is at sample, see if you can guess it based on the previous two lessons. It's at sample app gem file .railstutorial.org. So let's copy this and paste it in. Save it. Now, this is actually a gem file with every gem needed in the Ruby on Rails tutorial. Ordinarily, I would add gems incrementally, but for convenience in the screencast series, I'm going to just use this gem file from the very end. One thing worth noting is that there's actually a Ruby version right here. This might not work on your system. This has to match the Ruby version on your system. And the way you can check that is with ruby-v for the version. So this number here should match this number here. That's the one thing you might have to edit, because I can't predict what version of Ruby you might have. But once you've pasted this in, you can install the gems running bundle install. And again, we're going to do without production. That skips these gems here. Oh, right. So could not locate gem file. That's because if you look where I am, you can see I'm in in tilde backslash workspace. This tilde is the home directory, which is /home/Ubuntu on this system. So I need to go into the sample app directory. Let me try that again. All right, everything's installed now. So as with the previous two applications, I'm going to do some of the basic overhead right at the beginning and just get it out of the way. So that includes putting this under version control with Git. Let's get init and add everything. Add -A. Oops. And at this point, I do want to change the README. We didn't bother with the toy app, but since this is now the real sample application, I want to change the README. So that's the readme.rdoc. Remember that from the first lesson. So the way to do that is to move it first. Before we did it on a different branch in lesson 1, but as I mentioned, in that case, I wouldn't ordinarily use a separate branch for something so simple. So let's move the README to a markdown version. That should change it over here. If it doesn't, then you can refresh it. Why did that work? There it goes. And let's just put in the top level heading. Let's put this on a different line just so it doesn't run across. You can see there's a very subtle, I don't know if you actually can see it, but there's a very subtle vertical line here indicating that we've gone too far. And I'm pretty rigorous about adhering to that convention. Alright, so there's a README. We can take a look at that change. Git status. You can see that renamed file and the modified. And so let's commit that change. And at this point, I would like to push it up to Bitbucket. So let's do that. Yep, log in. And let's create a new app here. This is the full sample app. Okay, create it. Actually, don't know if you can use Markdown in there. But Markdown is designed to be readable even if it's not being turned into HTML. Okay, I have an existing project. Oops. Why isn't that working? Huh, that's weird. It's actually not. I'm clicking on it and nothing's happening. I can do a hard refresh, see if that helps. That's really strange. That's really weird. It's actually not. It's not toggling. All right. Well, let's just use our awesome powers here. Inspecting it. And here are the getting started instructions. Here it is. Here's the get remote add we need. And then git push -u origin should work. Okay, let's refresh that. And there we go. Okay, so Markdown does not actually work here. Wait a minute. Why did this not work? So this is actually a different spot for Markdown. Oh, there's actually an error here, so let's fix that. Maybe you noticed that, and I did not, obviously. And actually, if you look here, the syntax highlighting tells us. You can see that this this part in here is not highlighted, but now it is. I think it's not highlighted here because it's broken across a line. Yeah. Let's say that. Maybe that's why I didn't notice. Let's go back here, and there it goes. Good. All right, so now we've pushed our repository up to Bitbucket, and now I want to deploy this thing too. And to that end, I'm going to make the same hello world that we made in the last 2 lessons. The reason for this is basically because the default Rails page doesn't always work at Heroku, so it's hard to tell if the deploy worked. I do this in lots of contexts. Like when I'm writing a Ruby script, I'll just make a script that says put s hello world or something like that. We'll be talking about the put s command in the next lesson. It just prints a string out to the screen. I like getting started, just knowing that it's working. The application should always be working. Okay, so let's go to config routes. And let's see, where was it? It's here. It is root route. So it's the application controller. And hello. You can see that the IDE is actually completing some of these things if we do this here. You can just hit tab. I'll be using that a lot later in the tutorial. Okay, let's run a local server. And by local, I mean development. Just remember that if you're not using the Cloud IDE, you should just type Rails server. The other stuff, not only is it not necessary, but it actually won't work unless you define these variables, which are called environment variables. Oops, and again, I made the same error. It's now telling me, hey, I'm trying to create a new Rails app. Why didn't that work? And the answer is, well, I'm in the wrong directory. So let's cd into the right directory and just up arrow a couple times. And now that should work. All right, let's check that out, make sure it's working. It's weird, I'm not sure why it's asking me to sign in, but I can do that. All right, there we go. So it's working. Oh, I cleared my cookies. I think that's what happened. All right, so hello world. That's excellent. That's a good start. Just make those private. And now I want to deploy this to Heroku. Oh, let's commit that change, the hello change. So again, -am is all, and then the message is @hello. Let's create our Heroku app. Get push Heroku master, and then visit this here. Oops. I'll copy it at the end. By the way, you might notice there's a little warning here. There are actually a couple warnings. Don't worry about that. In fact, anything that's a warning you probably shouldn't worry about generally if it's not an actual error, but we will actually be fixing this up later in the tutorial, in lesson 7, I believe. Alright, let's check it out, see if it's working. Oh, what's the URL? Here it is. There we go, hello world. Alright, it's working. It's really important, I think, to deploy even at this early stage, because it's so easy just to go along and make bunches of changes and then wonder why it's not working in deployment. It's so much easier just to do it incrementally. Alright, we can close this down. We can leave this up because we're going to be doing a lot of development locally. Now that we've done all that prep work, it's time to get started on the actual application. This is exactly the kind of thing that I would generally use a new branch for, so let's do that. It's called a topic branch. So we're going to make some static pages, and I want a branch for that. Again, you can see on Cloud9 it automatically puts the branch name in the prompt here, which is really useful. Recall from the last lesson that we used the Rails generate command to make a scaffold, which includes a whole bunch of generated code to make a user interface through the web. In this lesson, we're going to use Rails generate again, except this is the way you would actually do it in real life. I would almost never generate a scaffold, but I definitely would generate a controller. So what we're going to do now is we're going to generate a controller for static pages. This means pages that don't have any dynamic content or have at most a little bit of dynamic content. And the way we do that is with Rails generate controller static pages. Now this convention here is called camel case. It's because of the humps. You would write it like this. Camel case. It looks like it has humps. So this is the camel case convention. You can also use the equivalent snake case. Actually, I'm not sure offhand why that's called snake case, but you could do this. But the convention that I adopt is to use camel case. So you should capitalize each word in the name of the controller. And you may recall that we've added some actions in the past. We saw the generated actions in the last lesson. We added this hello action. I'm going to add 3 actions in this lesson. I want a home action for a home page, a help action for a help page, and an about action for an about page. Now you can actually include the actions that you want on the command line. So let's put in home and help. And I'm going to leave off about because we're going to intentionally forget it, so to speak, and then add in the about page by hand using test-driven development later in the lesson. Alright, we can see what that added. Good status. We can also just scroll up. But it's added a bunch of files. This is exactly the kind of time where, just at the beginning, I'd like to make one more commit. And then let's commit the message. My convention when I talk about controllers is to use the title case, the capitalization, but then put a space in, because this is just an English convention. You add a static pages controller. That's not a big deal. It's just the kind of convention that I've adopted. And now one of the things I really like to do at this point is to push up the branch. This way, if anything goes horribly wrong, I have a remote backup. The way to do that is to git push with the -u. This is the same -u called upstream, set upstream, that we used when we first pushed the repository up to Bitbucket. And Bitbucket is the origin. Remember we did git remote add origin, so origin is Bitbucket. And then the name of the branch that we want on the remote repository. Let's take a look at that. This is Bitbucket, and we can take a look at the branches. Here's the main branch, master, but then there's also a static pages branch. So this will save us if we do something horribly wrong. We have a remote backup of this static pages branch. One thing that's useful to know is that if you want to undo Rails generate, you can just do the inverse operation, which is Rails destroy. So if we wanted to destroy this controller, we could do this. The reason this is nice is because there are all these files. It's not just the controller. There's a helper, there are views, there's a bunch of things that get generated, and it's really convenient to have just a single step operation. But of course, I actually want that controller. So remember, there's a way to do this. I'm going to do git checkout-f. This is forces a checkout, and now it's clean. So I've just I've undone the results of running Rails destroy. All right, let's take a look at some of the results of that Rails generate. I'm going to look at the routes file here, and you can see that the generate command generated a couple of routes. There's get static pages home and get static pages help. This get refers to one of the 4 basic HTTP requests. These are the kind of requests that the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP, understands. And this is the most basic of them. This is what happens when you just visit a web page with a normal browser. You just hit a web page with a regular request. So you might guess this means that there's a home page at /staticpages/home. So let's check that out. Put in the slash. And there we go, static pages home. Find me in app views static pages home.html.erb. That's pretty useful. So let's go to the index. Actually, let's go to anything. home.html.erb, and there it is. This route itself, of course, refers to the static pages controller and the home action. So let's take a look at that. And here you can see that there are these empty actions, home and help. This is actually one of the reasons why it's not a bad idea to start learning Rails before really mastering Ruby. This is the kind of thing, this is a Ruby function, but in Ruby, just plain Ruby, this wouldn't do anything. The convention in Rails, though, is that an action like this, just an empty action, automatically tries to render a corresponding view with the name of the action. So in this case, home.html.erb, this guy. Let's take a look at the corresponding help page. Here. It's the same thing, static pages help, find me in app views static pages help.html.erb. So let's open that up. And by the way, there's something about this to go to anything that's kind of annoying. You might notice that there are a bunch of repeated files. There's test helper, for example, in each of the 3 applications that we've made. So there's hello app, toy app, and sample app. And this is inconvenient enough that I'm actually going to remove these 2 other applications. It's not that big a deal, but it's the kind of detail that will make our lives a little easier. Also remember that those repositories are actually pushed up to Bitbucket, so we're not actually losing anything. I'm going to cd back and remove recursive force, and I want to get rid of the hello app and the toy app. If we refresh it here, there we go. And what if I look for like test helper? Yeah, no, there's only one of them. That's great. By the way, this kind of thing here is exactly the sort of thing you should learn to ignore. As soon as it says it is all fine, Heroku does that too, you can pretty much stop reading. It's like, okay, well, it's just giving me some extra information. It's probably not a problem. Just for completeness, though, I'm going to run the suggested command here to ignore the warnings. This is the kind of thing that might very well never happen on your system. This is something that's specific to what's called Ruby Version Manager, or RVM, that's being run at the Cloud IDE. All right, at this point we've taken a look at these static pages that were generated by Rails Generate Controller, and then with the names of the actions. Now I'd like to actually put some custom content in these pages. So let's start with the home page. Actually, we can just select in here. Change the top level heading. This H1 just refers to a top level heading. You can see its effects here. It's just it's set in bold with a larger font size. And then there's a paragraph here, and I actually want to put in a new line. You can see here that the IDE actually put in an extra indentation level right there. It's a little convenient touch. I'm going to put in a link with an anchor tag, the href, which is the hyperref. This is the URL. You can see it also puts in the end tag, which is convenient. That was not, I did not do that. That was the IDE automatically doing it. Actually, I'm going to put in a new line here, just to keep everything in a nice alignment. Okay, so let's save that and take a look. Refresh it, and there it is. Now, sample app. This is the home page for the Ruby on Rails tutorial. And you can actually see at the bottom of the screen, if you look down in this area, it shows you the URL. Of course, that's specific to this browser. I'm using Chrome here. But most browsers will give you some information about what the URL is. All right, let's add some custom content for the help page. Let's take a look at this here. Help, and this is the actual help. I mean, this is useful. So this is how you get, oops, I'm going to put this in here. This is how you get help. There's actually a help section on the Rails tutorial website. So at the, again, I want an anchor tag, the hyperreference or hypertext reference. So what I did there was I typed tab because there was some completion. Basically what's happening there is the IDE is seeing that there's a string somewhere else in the system, somewhere else in the project, and it's giving me a chance to complete it, which is really quite convenient, especially if you have like long class names. Okay, so it's at railstutorial.org/ and then it's an ID on the page. It's help. Oops, herp. Help. And there we can end the tag there. Rails tutorial help section, and then that's if you want help on the Rails tutorial itself. Of course, if you want help on the sample app, you can see these screencasts, or you can see the Rails tutorial book itself. See if that worked. It looks good. Now that we've added some custom content to the home and help pages, I'd like to create the about page that I mentioned earlier. You can take a look at it now. Just go to static pages about. You can see we're sorry, but something went wrong. And that's not surprising because there's nothing there. So what we're going to do in this section is add this about page, not using the browser, but using test-driven development. So we're actually going to let the tests guide us in implementing this page. So automated tests are incredibly useful. They catch errors, they let you make changes to your application while being confident that you're not breaking it. And they also act as a client for your code so that it often helps you in designing your application to write the tests first. But that's not always the right decision, and we'll see throughout the rest of this tutorial some of the cases where it makes sense to write the test second or not to write tests at all. But automated testing is a huge deal, and I remember the bad old days when there weren't automated tests for web applications, and it was terrible. So this is a big deal. This is just such a great thing that you can do that. So we're going to start with this test directory and take a look at the tests that got generated for us by Rails generate. So where is it? It's controllers. By the way, you may be curious about this .keep. This is being shown because I have show hidden files enabled. That just is there to make sure Git actually keeps this directory, but it's not important for our purposes. Let's get rid of the hidden files. There we go. One of the great things about having Rails generate some code for us is it gets us started. Take a look at this. We've got test should get home, test should get help. By the way, this convention of using the word should here, I will sometimes follow and sometimes not, based on whichever sounds more natural, at least to me. And I really like having these ends all cascade at the end like that, and I like having a new line here, so I'm going to make those changes just to make the code look the way I want it to look. And let's take a look at this. This test here has this is just a string. This can be, we could put anything in here. We could just put a bunch of stuff in here. That would change the message that gets output, but it wouldn't affect the test. This, on the other hand, matters. This says get home. So what this is doing is it is essentially issuing a browser request to the home action. So in this context, I often like to split the IDE and be able to look at the tests on one side and the application code on the other side. So what this does is this gets the home page, and then it asserts the response to be success. So there are a bunch of response codes defined by HTTP. In this case, it happens to be 200 OK, but Rails has this abstraction layer so that you can just say success. So the heart and soul of tests involves these these declarations, test, and then do a bunch of stuff, end. We'll talk in the next lesson about what this object is. It's called a block. And then inside of the test, there are a bunch of assertions. And this just asserts that something is true. So in this case, we're asserting that the response is a success. And then the same thing for the help page down here. Get the help page and assert the response is success. We can run these tests, the command line, like this. So it's bundle exec, which again is unnecessary sometimes, but I'll include it for completeness. And then rake, and then test. You can see here that the test passed. 2 runs, 2 assertions, 0 failures, 0 errors. All right, now that we've gotten our advanced testing set up, it's time to add the About page. So we're going to use test-driven development. This involves writing the test first and then writing the application code to get the test to pass. So see if you can guess what the test is going to be. This is the beauty of having just a little bit of generated code. This is not rocket science. We're just going to use this same model. So let's copy this, paste it in. What I did there, by the way, this is one of my favorite tricks for copying this kind of block. It's tempting to do this. You do this, and then you have to go in and figure out how many new lines there are, and so on. But what I like to do is just copy this, or select it, copy it, and then just paste twice. We paste over the thing we just copied, and then paste it again. So test should get about, and then get about, an exact analogy, and we want the same response. We want the response to be success. So let's save that, and guard should run the test. You can see how nice this is in the context of screencasts. All right, let's take a look at the error. It says here, no route matches, action about, controller static pages. By the way, this exact error message might change. Rails sometimes tweaks these messages, but it's not important that everything match exactly. We can see, though, that the first problem is that there's no route for the about page. And indeed, that's the case. There is no such route. By the way, you can see how nice it is to use GoToAnything, this thing I mentioned before, especially in this context where I'm using both sides of the IDE. It's annoying to have to go over here and click around. So it's once you know where things are, it's really easy to navigate your system like this. All right, so let's see if you can guess how to define the route. Again, it's an exact analogy with these guys. Get static pages home, get static pages help. I'm just going to copy, paste, and then just call it about. We're going to add an about page. So let's take a look at that. We can rerun the test. I'm just going to save it to get it to rerun the test. And now there's a new error. It's still red, you can see here, but it's a different error. It says now the action about could not be found for static pages controller. And that's true. There is no such action. We've got def home, def help. Let's put in def about. Define the about action. And now it's still not working, but there is a new problem again, missing template static pages about. So in this context, template means a view. Just look over here. This is in app views static pages. And you can see that there's a view, each for the help page and the home page. So what we need is a view for the about page. There are several ways to create a new file. I showed you one before where I used the touch command to create that initializer. By the way, an initializer, let's see where it lives. It's in config initializers. These are just files that get executed before Rails boots up. So that's why the backtrace silencer is in here. It's just to load that that stuff before Rails starts, or as part of Rails starting. So we could use that touch trick, but actually there's a problem here. If you look at these two tabs, I've got both of them are being used. So ordinarily I would make sure to have at least one terminal window available for issuing commands. But in this case, what I want to do is actually use a different trick. CD here. I got bitten by that a couple times. All right, let's use another method for creating a file. I just right-clicked on that, and I'm going to say new file. Why didn't that work? New file. It's not working. That's weird. There we go. Oh, I see. It's having trouble. Okay, that's the kind of thing that happens sometimes. I don't want that. I want to do this. Ordinarily, it would give you a chance to rename it, but if something weird happens like it just did to me, you can just go down to the rename part of the menu and let's do about.html.erb. Oops. No, just a little hiccup there. It happens sometimes. All right, so that's our about page. Now let's see how we're doing here. Just going to go back to the test and save. And there it worked. Look at that. 3 tests, 3 assertions, 0 failures, 0 errors, 0 skips. We actually won't be using skips in this tutorial, but you can Google around if you're interested. Failures are when something didn't go right with our assertions. Errors are where there's actually an error in the application, like an exception, which is some sort of exceptional behavior, a syntax error, or so on. So that's it. Now we've got a working about page. In fact, let's double check that. If we refresh this, it should give us a non-error, but in fact it's blank. So let's actually fill it in with some content. This is the kind of thing you could test drive if you wanted to, but generally speaking, it's quite brittle to test detailed HTML structure. So I'm just going to say we're not going to bother testing this. So the about page, and let's just put a paragraph. This p tag, as you may have inferred, is a paragraph tag. railstutorial.org. So this is just about this application. The Ruby on Rails tutorial is a book and screencast series. To teach web development with Ruby on Rails. Right, this is the sample application for the tutorial. Let's see if that worked. And looks like it's working. Great. The series of steps that we just followed is sometimes called red, green, refactor. That third step is something we're not going to do right now because there's nothing to refactor. But refactoring refers to changing the form of the code without changing its function. In other words, changing the internals without changing the behavior. And we will have a chance to refactor a little bit later in this lesson. Now that we've defined some static pages for our application, we're going to make slightly dynamic pages. In particular, what we're going to do is arrange for the title of each of these pages to change based on which page it is. So if you look here in the browser, it says sample app. That's because there's actually a title being defined by the code generated by Rails generate controller. What we want is to have this say about, and then we're going to use a vertical pipe character like this. Let me just type it out here. Just use this space here. It's going to look like this. About, and then some base title. So let's just call it Ruby on Rails tutorial sample app. So this part of the title will be the same for every page, and then this part here, this first part, will vary depending on which page it is. And we're going to do this using test-driven development. So the first step is to get to red, which is to write failing tests for the thing we want. And in this context, what I want to do is get rid of what's called a layout file. It's an application.html.erb. We'll restore this in just a moment. The title is coming from this. The reason that we see sample app here in the tab is because of this title tag. But we actually don't want this right now. It's more instructive to get rid of it. So I'm just going to move it. It's in, where's this, in app views, layouts. I mean, this is the kind of thing, if you don't know offhand, which you probably wouldn't at this point, you can just look through your tree here. App views, it's got to be in the views. Well, layouts, that looks promising, and there it is. So it's in app views layouts, application.html.erb. I'm just going to move that to here, to the current directory. This is sometimes called the root directory, or the Rails root. So let's call it. We can actually name it to anything. We're just going to move it back at the end of this section. All right, so now we want to write a failing assertion for the titles. So let's just put that in here. Let's we're going to actually let's do the about, because we've got the title over here that we want. We're going to say assert, and this is the kind of thing where you just have to Google around or use something like the Rails tutorial book to learn about these things. We're going to use an assertion called assert select. And sometimes these HTML tags that we see here, for example, are referred to as selectors. I actually don't like this name, assert select, very much. I don't think it's very clear, but we will get used to it because we'll be using it a lot. By the way, I mentioned that it's not a good idea generally to test HTML structure, but this is the kind of thing that we really do want to have break. In other words, we don't want our test suite to break if the title gets changed. All right, so I'm going to put this in a string, and you can actually see here that you've noticed this before, that the IDE here is giving us a hint that there's a syntax error. It's kind of nice. So this is what the title should look like. We want it to look like about, and then this vertical pipe character, and then this base title. And we're going to use the same pattern on the other two. Help and home. And let's save that, and guard should run our test. Again, if you're not using guard, you should just run a bubble exec rake test. Oh, so it's giving me a warning here, deprecation warning. I told you before that maybe you shouldn't worry about warnings, but this is actually an error because I haven't told it which selector it is. It should be the title selector. So I actually want this. Actually want title here. It's the title tag. Do this. There we go. So now it should give me just a normal failing test. There we go, 3 failures. So it says here expected 0 to be greater than or equal to 1. So that what that means is that it's looking for a title tag with this content and it's not finding anything. So that's our first step. That's red. Now we need to get to green. So let's do it on the about page. We should go from 3 failures down to 2. The basic structure of a full HTML page, which we're about to use, starts with what's called a doc type. In this case, the doc type is just called HTML. This is the current standard in HTML. It's called HTML5. And then we need a tag, the HTML tag, and it's got the end tag too. Then there's a section of the page. In fact, we can look at the layout file. This is the layout that we got rid of. The highlighting isn't working here because I don't have the right file name extension, but you can see that there's this head section. I actually like to indent this. So there's the head, and now I'm going to put in the title. So the title is going to be, on this page, about, and then let's just copy it from here. So that's the head of the page, and then there's the body. Let's copy this and put it in here. And I'm going to indent it too. So I'm selecting it, I'm just going to tab it in. Tab, tab. And we can save it. Now I don't have it set up to run the test. I usually don't test views like this. So in this case, we want to go over here and just hit save to have it run this test file. You can see it's gone down to 2 failures. So that means that page is working. So let's do the other 2. Actually, let's just copy this here. All the structure is repeated. So I'm going to copy this and go to let's go to the home page. Put this in. This. These are the closing tags. Save this and go back. Actually, we can just do all of them at once. Help. Oh, I didn't have the right title, did I? Here it is. Should be home. And then here, just tab this in twice. In anticipation of what we're about to do, there it goes. And then close down the tags and change the title here. This is the help page. Save that, and let's go over here and just save it to tell guard to run it. And there we go. Now we're green. Look at that. Red, green, re So we've done red, we've done green, and now we're going to do refactor. So if you look at these files, these views, you can see that there's a lot of repeated structure. But they're not exactly the same. This title varies from page to page. So perhaps somewhat paradoxically, our first step is going to be to add even more duplication. We're going to make these title areas exactly the same. And the way we're going to do that is with something that's a little bit fancy. It's a little advanced, but it's really useful, and we're going to do it once and never deal with this again. We're going to use a Rails facility called provide. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to go to the top of this file, and this is our first example of embedded Ruby. I'm going to say that, oops, let me do this. I want to provide a title, and I'm just going to use the base title of this is about. So provide title about. This syntax here, this the angle bracket %, evaluates this code as Ruby, and in this case provide is part of the Rails framework. And then in this section here, what I want to do is actually insert the results of this title into the view, into the template. And the way to do that is the same angle bracket %, but then with an equal sign. And this is just the kind of thing that you have to get used to. You're not going to understand everything. In this context, you use the yield keyword. So you type yield. This could be clearer, Rails. It's a little, that actually used to be clearer, like back in Rails 1 point something. But this is actually the right way to do it in the sense that it's better Ruby. So let's save that, and actually let's go up here. And you know, it's annoying me that this is not working, that these tests aren't running automatically. So I'm going to change up the guard file. This should have just been working for you, because by the time you're watching this, you'll be using this updated guard file. So I'm just going to show you how to do this. All right, this is quite advanced, and don't worry if this is just complete gobbledygook. This is really weird and strange syntax if you've never seen Ruby before. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add in the right controller test when the views change. This here is matching app views and then some kind of controller. So this would be, for example, app views static pages, and this name static pages is being captured in this matches variable. And it's running what are called integration tests, which we'll be talking about later in this tutorial. But for now, I want to actually add this in test controllers. And then I want to, this is called variable interpolation. We'll actually be talking about this in the next lesson. So I'm going to say matches of 1. This is the name of the controller, like static pages. And then the name of the test, as you can see here, static pages controller test. This is static pages controller test.rb, and putting it in an array and adding it. Again, we'll actually be talking about this in the next lesson, this kind of data structure. So let's save that and go over here and save this and see if it works. Yeah, now it's running. Okay, so that's nice. That'll be a lot more convenient. So that means our about page is passing. Let's just copy this, provide, and let's do it on the home page here. Change to home. And over here, change it to help. And then we want to put in the same yield here. You can see that this yield is actually going to be the same. We're replacing home here with yield. We're replacing help here with yield. So let's save this. Still passing. This is the refactor part. This is so great because we've gotten to green and now we're making changes. So if there's just a tiny change or a tiny error, if you have this, it'll go red. Oops, there was a mistake. Or if we define the wrong thing here, if we accidentally keep about from this page, oops, it's still failing. So the test suite is going to catch any of those little errors. It's so easy to make these errors because you can see I'm just copying and pasting this thing. It'd be so easy just to do this and then forget to change that. And then when I save it, the test suite will fail. So it tells me, oh, I need to change it up to home. All right, so that's great. So now we've gotten back to green from that little breakage I introduced. And now we're ready to do the final step of refactoring. If you look at the top of these pages, right, this section here, and also the bottom here, but the most important part is this here. Let's just look at the head. So this section is exactly the same now, because we've factored out this variable title into this section. This is exactly the same in each of them. And so that's exactly what a layout file is for. If you look at this layout file, this is the one that I moved, you can see it's the same kind of structure. The indentation is different here. But so if you look at this, you can see probably what we want to do is just replace this part with this stuff here, with the title. And then the actual body, this stuff in here, gets inserted by this yield. Again, this yield it's not important at all to know what this does exactly at this point, but this is a very characteristic Ruby keyword. For those of you who have studied Ruby, this is yielding a block, but that is not important at all at this point. So to complete the refactoring, I want to move this layout file back to where it came from. So let's just reverse this, delete this here. And now let's open it back up. There it is. Let me just change the indentation a little bit here, just to make it the same as what we have over there. Oops, let's take a look at this. And I like to adhere to this rule that it's not too long. So I'm going to put a new line in here. And actually, if you move this over, you can see there's a little vertical line here that's at 80 columns. So I want to fit everything inside there. You can see both of these guys fit right in though. This is just stuff that gets generated by Rails. It's not at all important to know at this point what it's doing. If you're curious, you can Google anything like this, CSRF meta tags. Just drop that into Google and you can read all about it. Now I just noticed something here. This bothers me. You can see that this is actually overflowing. If again, there's this vertical column. This is overflowing it, but we're about to get rid of this this header stuff, and we're going to unindent this. We'll dedent it, and it will restore order to the application. All right, so let's take a look at this. This is we've got our head here, body, yield. And I'm just going to put this in here. So this is our same structure. You can see the structure in the layout file. So what we want to do is just take this stuff here and just copy it right in. Everything except the provide. That's the thing that's not the same. So I'm just going to actually cut that, and we're going to get rid of this here. There we go. So now it's exactly the same on each one, and so we're just going to get rid of the head and the body here. Dedent it. That's Shift Tab in this IDE. And actually, I'm not sure if this will be green. Let's take a look. Yeah, so it's failing because we haven't replaced all of the code. We haven't gotten rid of this in every one of them. So let's get rid of this here. So this layout is being run on every single page. So we can just get rid of this common code. So we're still red, but by the end of this refactoring, we should be back to green. Oops, I actually just screwed up, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Well, we'll let our test catch it. So at this point, after doing this dedent and removing this stuff, my expectation is that it will pass. But in fact, it's failing, so that's not good. There are two reasons. Actually, I haven't saved this file, have I? You can tell if I make a change, this icon here, it goes. There's like this little this open circle, like a disk. If I save it, then it goes away. Wait a minute, I expected it to be green. What did I do wrong? Well, this is why you have tests. Like, oh, I see. You can see here that it's actually telling me the line number where the error is. It's line 8. So we can go to static pages controller, line 8, and there it is. So that tells me that the title test for the home page is not working. Well, let's look at the home page. Oh yeah, look at that. I'm missing my provide line. There's no place. Just oh, there it is. Yeah. So I just accidentally deleted it. Let's copy it from here and change this to home, and we should be back to green. Great. As a final step, I'd like to change the root route from what it currently is, which is just hello world, you can see here, to the actual home page. That's the usual convention, is that the root route goes to the home page. So let's set that up. We can start by deleting, oops, that's not it. What's the application controller? Here it is. All right, let's get rid of this. We don't need that anymore. And it's the route that controls the root route. Okay, so we've got root application hello. In the last lesson, we changed this to the user's index. So it was the user's controller and the index action. But in this case, what we want over here, we want this to be the static pages controller and the home action. So let's change it here. Oops, that's not right. Here. And you can see that the IDE is filling things in for me. It's kind of nice. I just hit tab, static pages, and then we want home. Save that and refresh it. And there it is. Now our home page is at the root route. With our test suite in a passing state, this is often called green. And in this context, I would like to do a little bit of setup, because in fact, you can see that there's nothing green here, well, except for the prompt. But there's nothing in the test suite that indicates that the system is green. And there are a couple of other things I also want to do. I want to make some configuration for this screencast series. This is optional, and the code is quite advanced in some places, so don't worry about the details. And you don't have to do this at all if you don't want to. You can get through the entire tutorial just running bundle exec rake test and its variants. You can also specify a specific file here, for example, and even a specific test. You can get through the whole tutorial without ever doing the advanced setup I'm about to do, but as you'll see, it's really convenient for the screen. This is the actual online version of the Rails tutorial book, and I'm going to start by installing what are called mini test reporters. So you can just follow the instructions. It says to include these lines in testhelper.rb, so let's do that. And where was it? Oh, it's at the top. It's right after this thing. Got that. And there's nothing that's difficult here. This is not rocket science. I didn't know how to do this. I just went to the mini reporters, or the mini test reporters documentation, and here, we're just copying this. And in fact, I didn't even know about this gem. I just knew I wanted some red and some green in my test, and so I Googled around and eventually found this. So this is how everything gets done, pretty much, in life, at least in development. And with this change, we actually should be red and green. Let's check it out. Take a look at bundle exec rake test. There we go. So we've got green, and let me show you how to get to red. Let's just put an error in here somewhere or some mistake. Let's say assert response redirect. It's another thing that can happen. Right now it's red because, in fact, when you get the home page, you don't get a redirect. You get a success. So let's get back to green. Great. And the third advanced configuration is really nice. This is the kind of thing that makes a big difference during the screencasting. And so when you need to use this thing called guard. So from an external perspective, it looks like we hardly did anything.
Grounded in examples from Lesson 3, this lesson explores some elements of the Ruby programming language that are important for Rails.
And the third advanced configuration is really nice. This is the kind of thing that And the third advanced configuration is really nice. This is the kind of thing that makes a big difference during the screencasting. And so when you need to use this thing called guard. So what guard does is it monitors the file system, and when things change, it runs the tests, or it runs appropriate tests. So for example, if we change the static pages controller, it will automatically run the static pages controller test, which is really nice. And by the way, I should mention that the gem file. I should mention that the reason this is all working is because we have this gem file that includes all the gems. There's some magic going on in the sense that it's just working, but it's because we actually installed these gems at the beginning. All right, so let's initialize guard. It's actually a good idea to do bundle exec here. This created what's called a guard file. That's what I started to type before because I was anticipating this. This is the file that determines which tests get run when you change which files. So I don't want to use this guard file. I want to use the one from the book. This guard file has been optimized for the Rails tutorial. And again, you should not be trying to copy what I'm putting in here now. You should use what's in the book. Oops, why didn't that work? There we go. Copy that and paste it in. There we go. And let's see what happens if we run guard. So here's the guard prompt. There's really only one thing you'll ever do with the guard prompt. I've got it set so all on start is false. That means that guard will not run the full test suite when it starts, but we can have it run the full test suite just by hitting return. There we go. So you can see that it's green. Now, not only to show you the reason we're doing this, though, I'm going to make a change here. I'm going to put a new line in here and save it. And now you can see it's automatically running the static pages controller test. And if it ever is the case where you make a change to an application file and the corresponding test file doesn't run, or the test file that you want to have run doesn't run, you can edit the guard file. There are quite a few examples. At this early stage, it's probably a little bit intimidating. This is pretty advanced code, but that's how I built up this test file, or this guard file rather. Is just going through the tutorial, I would find myself wishing that some test would run, and when it didn't, I would just add it to the guard file. This is a quick insert. There's actually something I forgot that causes problems when you try to merge the topic branch into the master branch. When running guard, it boots up something called the Spring server that I'll mention later in this lesson, and it creates a bunch of process IDs, or PIDs, in the Spring directory. This is the directory. These we do not want to be under version control. This will cause conflicts that are totally irrelevant to what we're actually doing. So it's important to add these to the git ignore file. Again, this is the sort of thing I wouldn't ordinarily worry about. This is definitely advanced, but if you are going to follow the advanced testing setup, you should definitely do this. You should add this in. So I set it up to show hidden files, and now I need to open git ignore. and it's here in the tutorial. It's this extra line, ignore Spring files. So let's add this in, save it, and actually I can just hide these again. All right, so that's just a little bit of configuration that you'll need to make if you're doing the advanced testing setup. So from an external perspective, it looks like we hardly did anything in this chapter. We've just got these 3 static pages with just this tiny amount of dynamic content. Oh, by the way, it's worth noting that, look at that, there's home there in the URL. We can also go to static pages about, and there it is, the variable title is working. Of course, it's nice to actually confirm in a browser that it's working. The tests tell us that it should be working, but it's always good to do a sanity check. So we've got this very small amount of dynamic content, but these are basically static HTML pages. But we've done this development in such a way that we now have a foundation for adding an arbitrary amount of dynamic content. So there will be a huge amount of dynamic content in the lessons ahead. Now that we've finished this feature, let's commit our changes. We finished this topic branch. We can add everything, and then commit the changes. At this point, I'd like to check out the master branch and merge in the changes from the static pages topic branch. But I'm having some laggy behavior on Cloud9, and I want to show you how to deal with this if things are kind of slow. It's actually sped up a little bit now, but if you inspect the processes using the ps command, psaux, and then this is called a pipe. We're piping it to grep, which matches Spring. So there's a box, if this looks mysterious, there's a box in the Rails tutorial that talks about this kind of thing. What we're doing is inspecting the processes in our system, and in particular we're looking at Spring, which is a server that runs when the tests are running. And what it does is it preloads a bunch of Rails configuration stuff. So basically anything that can be preloaded is preloaded, and that's just to speed up the test suite. But sometimes they kind of hang out. These Spring processes last for a while. In principle, you can type Spring stop, but often that doesn't work. You can see it doesn't even think it's running. So in this case, we have to bring in the heavy artillery. We're going to do what's called a kill. We're going to kill these processes. This is the process ID right here, and we can kill them individually, but it's easier to kill them all at once with pkill. We give it the message, the Unix message for killing, which is -9 for some reason. It just happens to be -9. And then we give it the file pattern Spring. This is pretty advanced stuff, but this is what happens sometimes. And now if we look at our processes and match the word Spring, there's just that command itself. So this is the command we just ran, this grep Spring. So that means we killed all those Spring processes, and it should be a lot faster. Okay, let's check out the master branch. And you can see actually this changed in here because this routes file is different on the master branch. And let's merge in the static pages. There we go. You can see the routes file changed back. And now we can push these changes up to Bitbucket. We just merged in that branch and we can push up the changes. And of course we can also deploy to Heroku. In this context, I feel like it's a really good idea always to run your tests before deploying. So in this case, bundle exec rake test. You can actually just type rake, which is an alias for rake test, and on the cloud.eu you also don't need bundle exec, at least not as of this moment. But I include it for completeness. Alright, so you can see we're green, and we're ready to push up to the production server. Okay, the deploy is done. Let's see if it worked. And there we go. Look at that. Try that. Check out static pages about. And help. Great. So it's working on the production server too. Looking at this page, I just realized that we're missing a period at the end of the sentence, so let's fix that right now. Actually, I want to do this on the topic branch. and put it here. And actually, I do like to push this up, just so the topic branch matches the local branch. Go back to the master branch, merge in the topic branch, and then redeploy. Actually, let's push up to Bitbucket first. All right, let's see if that worked. Just refresh this. All right, there's the extra period that was missing. There's even one more thing I want to fix, just to make sure that the screencasts are consistent with the book. There's an extra level of indentation here that I accidentally put in, so I'm going to do a Shift-Tab to put it back. And this will just give you a sense of how quickly you can do things. I'm on the static pages branch here. Say dedent some code, the opposite of indent. And now I know exactly what I want to do, so I'm just going to issue the commands chained together with a double ampersand, which will run all of the commands, but will stop running the commands if any of them fails. So I'm going to push it up, and check out master. So you can see all of these commands will execute at once, or sequentially. So we've seen, just from this example right here, that Rails is great at these kinds of static pages. In fact, it's so good that I prefer to use Rails even if it's just a static website. And the reason for that is because you never know when you might want to add just a little bit of dynamic content. The difficulty of going from purely static to just slightly dynamic is really high if you're using a static website, if you're not using a framework. But with Rails, you have all this power. And so, for example, you can change the title on a per-page basis the way we did in this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll start with this idea of the page title, and we'll factor that functionality into what's called a helper function. And in the process, we'll discover that we have quite a lot of limitations in our Ruby knowledge. So the next lesson will be somewhat of a diversion. We're going to talk about the basics of the Ruby programming language that underlies Rails, that Rails is written in. And then in lesson 5, we'll start up again with the main development of the sample application.
Grounded in examples from